We are obviously here at the Qatar Economic Forum in Doha. So much to talk about, a lot of excitement. But maybe let's just start off with the fact that President Trump was in the Gulf region last week. What is that going to do to some of the conversations that we're going to be having here? And also, how has it set the tone for what these Gulf countries are trying to achieve?
Good morning, Joumanna. Well, President Trump's visit to the region had two highlights, or had two main focal points. One was obviously investments, and the other was the U.S.'s engagement with Iran, or security of the region in general. On the former, President Trump had basically got what he wanted. He scored big wins when it comes to his own domestic audience. The Gulf countries in the region committed more than $3 trillion of investments into the U.S. The numbers are big, the details are kind of scarce, but it almost doesn't matter for Trump. He needed big wins during his first overseas trip in his second term in office, and he got it. On the latter, on the security issue, I think the dynamics are a bit more tricky. We have seen that the U.S. and Iran have been in indirect talks to defuse the nuclear problem, if we can call it that. And President Trump has essentially said that he's going to resolve this issue one way or another. And what it essentially means is that either the talks will work, or, in his own words, something bad will happen in Iran. Again, in terms of the security and the relationship with Iran, I think the key issue last week was the fact that President Trump announced a lifting of sanctions on Syria, which is clearly linked to that country's ability to remove foreign fighters from its soil, effectively blocking the land link between Iran and some non-state actors in the region, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon. That is going to be key to watch going forward, and that is clearly an important issue for the Gulf states, because if diplomats go quiet, something else will happen, and that something else is possibly a military operation, which obviously Middle East Gulf producers wouldn't want to see, given the fact that just a tiny waterway is dividing them from Iran.
Yeah, well, thanks for the geopolitical setup. Obviously, some major breakthroughs on that front last week. But Onur, let's also talk about some of the economic pledges that these Gulf countries have put together last week. Lots of headline numbers flying around, 1 trillion here, 1 trillion there. How much is that? How much of that is going to frame the discussions that we have this week as well, in terms of what exactly these Gulf countries are going to be pledging in terms of actual money that goes into the U.S. versus what's been signed on the ground in terms of tangible deals?
Well, as you said, in Doha, the main theme at the Qatar Economic Forum will be transforming the global economy through the rest of the decade, and by extension, economies in the region. And that visit by Trump makes this a very timely discussion, because the pledges made last week by the three main Gulf oil producers, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates, have created a new commitment for these states. And this unleashes a new power, pulling their economies in one direction, whereas the existing priorities they have, the domestic priorities, are going to be pulling their economies in the opposite direction. All these three countries have announced very ambitious and costly domestic transformation agendas that are aimed at weaning their economies off oil income. Now, this comes at a time when oil prices are already suppressed and possibly can stay there for a prolonged period of time. How does that affect their ability to live up to their promises made to President Trump last week? Trillions of dollars to be spent on everything from U.S. tech to defense technologies, aviation, and also likely foreign direct investment into the U.S. This is going to be, how this unfolds is going to be extremely tricky, and this is what people in Doha this week will probably discuss.